you're moon landing. You're not a. You believe in the moon landing, right?
I used to believe in the moon landing.
You don't anymore?
I had a joke in my act about it, that before COVID, I would have told you vaccines the most important invention in human history, and after COVID, I'm like, I don't think we went to the moon.
Yeah, I know that was in your, but
Yeah.
you actually think that?
I think there is a less than zero possibility that we did not go to the moon.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
So this is a very interesting conversation here on the Joe Rogan Experience between Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh. Both are very smart. Joe's probably more knowledgeable about the moon landing and his beliefs on why it's a conspiracy than Walsh is on the moon landing and his beliefs that it was real. So just keep that in mind as you're watching this, that Rogan's going to be much more knowledgeable about this. He's going to be interested in it for decades, whereas Walsh looked it up enough to form an opinion and probably didn't dig as deep into it as Rogan has. I'm going to be fact-checking as we go along here, the different claims by each of them, and at the end of the video, we can maybe make our own opinion on what we think about the moon landing.
Why do you think we went to the moon?
Because it's exactly what you just said about, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the main thing is what you just said about the Earth, the vastness of the conspiracy that would be required to fake that. It's so vast that it's a lot more incredible to believe that we faked it than to believe that we just went. And going to the moon, it's a massive achievement, but I think the greatest human achievement of all time. But even so, to fake it would be even more massive, because not only would you need all of these space agencies and all the different whatever people in American institutions to be colluding, but you'd also need foreign governments, including adversarial foreign governments, who at this point certainly would know we faked it, and for some reason haven't blown the lid on it. So they're letting us take this achievement that they know. Like, why haven't the Russians come out and said?
So Walsh here brings up a couple interesting points. The first one is how vast the conspiracy would need to be to actually work. I think maybe Walsh is going on the assumption that the entire moon landing was faked, like we didn't even launch a rocket that made it to the moon. I don't think many moon landing conspiracy theorists believe this, because for that to be the case, then every single person that worked on the Apollo program would have had to have been in on it. And there's a lot of evidence that something went to the moon. The lunar probe is still up there. Like Walsh mentioned, various governments tracked the lunar module or the rocket on its way to the moon. People intercepted the radio communications. It wasn't encrypted, the radio communication between the astronauts and mission control. So a lot of people did track this thing. When it went up there, they tracked the communications. It set up experiments up there and brought back lunar samples. And we can actually see the lunar probe. They talk about this later on, but the lunar probe's been photographed by other countries' space programs that have gone around the moon. So there's a lot of evidence that something went to the moon. I think maybe the point that Walsh might be missing is we could have sent something to the moon and collected lunar samples and just brought it back and not sent actual people there. Now, to keep in mind, what this would involve would be pre-recorded audio and video coming from the lunar module and the rocket back to mission control. So the people that were talking to the astronauts in mission control would have had to have been in on it, because they would have been essentially talking to a pre-recorded voice of Buzz and Neil on the moon. So also in 1969, we didn't know the Soviets might have made it to the moon, in 1970 and 1971. They could have been just right behind us, and we didn't know at the time, the U.S., that the Soviets weren't just right behind us. So they would have been very nervous that the Soviets would have blown the lid on us had we just filmed this and not sent anything to the moon. So very, very, very few people, I believe, actually think that the whole moon landing was faked. They just think maybe we sent something to the moon, collected some stuff, came back, but the astronauts themselves didn't go.
Those things you're saying are true.
Right.
I don't argue with any of the things you're saying. But one of the things that I think you have to consider was, if it's not possible for human beings to safely go through the Van Allen radiation belts and out into deep space without much protection and face the temperatures that are on the surface of the moon, which get up to 250 degrees and 250 degrees below zero in the shadows. There's no environment there. It's hostile beyond belief. Micrometeorites are flying into the moon all the time. They're flying through space all the time. We've never had a single biological organism go out into deep space, past the Van Allen radiation belts, and then come back to Earth and come back alive, except human beings during the Apollo missions.
So Rogan makes an assertion here that we have never sent biological entities out past the Van Allen radiation belts into deep space and had them come back to Earth besides Apollo astronauts. This is actually false. The Soviets did it in 1968 with the Zond 5 spacecraft. They actually sent tortoises as well as, I believe, fruit fly larvae and some like seeds out into deep space, and they came back alive. The way that you can do this, and here's the Van Allen radiation belts. They are radioactive particles that are trapped in Earth's magnetic field. So this is actually a representation of Earth's magnetic field here. And the way that you can get through these Van Allen belts unharmed, you see a smaller belt here and a larger belt on the outside. What you can actually do, well, first of all, if you could theoretically launch from the poles, either the North or the South Pole, as you can see, you can bypass the belts entirely. They're just like a little donut that go all the way around Earth. Earth is just like inside this little donut of the belts. So if you could launch from the poles, no issue there. But the issue is it's very hostile in the Arctic, and it's actually easier to just launch. And what they do is they just kind of go through the belts right here where they're at their very smallest. That's how the Soviets did it in Zond 5, and that's actually how the Apollo astronauts did it. And you're exposed to radiation for about 1 to 2 hours. It's about the amount of radiation that you would get during an X-ray. The thickest part of the belt here, yes, if you tried to go through that, you would be microwaved just like a TV dinner. But you can kind of skirt through these low radiation zones here and be fine. Another assertion that Rogan makes is on micrometeorites, which here is some information on micrometeorites I got from Grok, Elon's AI bot, which, by the way, Grok, so much better than GPT, ChatGPT. ChatGPT gives you very PC answers. It's much quicker than Grok, but Grok is much more truth-seeking and gives you much more reliable information. GPT tends to hallucinate. So shout out to Grok here. But in this, we can see, if you can, welcome to pause and check this out, the amount that micrometeorites actually hit the moon. And here we can see the risk per hour for an astronaut for a 1 millimeter meteorite is about 1 in a million chance per hour. This would translate to 1 hit every 114 years for a man-sized object on the moon. And the Apollo 11 astronauts spent about 2.5 hours on the moon, which would be about a 1 in 400,000 chance of being hit by a meteorite. So not a 0% chance, but not like constant bombardment and you're out there dodging these things like the Matrix.
Technology was so crude that when they first showed the Apollo 11 landing, they didn't even show a direct feed to the networks. So like if you're on CBS News, you don't get a direct feed. What you do is you point a camera at a projection screen. So that's why the film looks so shitty. The camera is pointed to a projection screen where you see the astronauts jumping around on the moon. And you see this weird, grainy, third generation image, right? We didn't just lose that. We lost all the technology from the Saturn V rocket. They don't even have that anymore. In fact, they don't even have the original film. They erased all the original footage of the Apollo missions. So you just have copies of everything.
So Rogan brings up two really good points here. And for me, these are the two biggest points pointing towards a moon landing hoax. Number one, the video feed was shot onto a projection screen, and news stations actually pointed their cameras at that projection screen. So it is this weird kind of garbled up image. It looks like crap. If you go back and look up original Apollo 11 moon landing film, it looks like shit. And this could be attributed to maybe NASA was more concerned with the mission objective and not giving the best picture to the news stations. But it is an interesting point that's, if you want to say the moon landing was faked, that would be a good way to degrade the quality of the footage even more. Now, of course, NASA could have just degraded the quality in a direct feed. They could have just taken the film that they had of a faked moon landing, degraded the quality, and then transmitted that right to the networks. There was no need to do this weird projecting and recording thing. So, interesting counterpoint there. Also, we did lose the technology for the Saturn V rocket. They've talked about going back to the moon, and they've said that the engineering that we had for the Saturn V rocket, we've lost all of that, which I guess you could attribute to government incompetence, but that's a pretty strong argument. That's something that looks pretty suspicious to folks on the outside. Like, really, you lost the technology? And I totally get that. And additionally, he brings up that the original moon landing tapes were lost by NASA. They actually taped over them in the 80s. Which again, you could say it government incompetence, but that's very suspicious to me. Those are the three most suspicious things about the moon landing: is the way that it was shown to TV crews, the fact we lost the technology for the Saturn V rocket, and the fact that we taped over the original tapes. But we could maybe attribute that to government incompetence. To me, those are the three biggest pieces of evidence that point towards a fake moon landing.
Well, here's the main point. There's no evidence, because saying that it was a hoax is an assertion of it's not you're not just denying an event, you're asserting a whole other event that you say happened instead. And there is evidence that we went to the moon. Now someone who's a skeptic might say it's not enough evidence, or it's not good evidence. There's like evidence. There's eyewitness. There's people that went and came back and told us. There's footage. There's a lot. Okay. There is evidence.
Okay.
But there's no evidence of the hoax. Like, no one has come and said, "Here's my affirmative evidence that this hoax happened." It's never happened, right, as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
No one's ever provided that evidence.
So Walsh's argument to me here isn't that great. He's basically just saying that we don't have evidence of the hoax, and so therefore, how can you believe in it? I mean, we don't necessarily. If we had evidence of it, if we had evidence of a conspiracy around the JFK assassination, it wouldn't be a conspiracy. It would be a scandal. It would be like Iran-Contra. So not the greatest argument from Walsh, but again, Walsh is going to be less knowledgeable about this topic. I mean, he hasn't looked up the things about, Zond 5, the radiation belts, the Van Allen belts. So he's going to be less prepared than Rogan. But again, that doesn't, that's just because Joe is so much more passionate about this than Matt is.
I see what you're trying to say. The evidence that they went to the moon, there's a bunch, right? There's moon rocks, that's one. There's lunar reflectors that they placed on the moon, that's another. And there's a couple problems with those. First of all, the Soviets put laser reflectors on the moon as well. And also the moon itself, in many places where you shine lasers on it, it bounces back by itself. The reflective quality of the moon, the reason why the moon is so bright and white in the sky when the sun hits it, there's a certain amount of you get a certain amount of bounce back off of different things with lasers. There's some photographs that are interesting. What was it? Was the India? What was the one where they got the most high resolution photos of the lander?
I'm looking at Wikipedia right now of all third-party evidence of the Apollo mission.
One of the things that's interesting is they gave a moon rock to, was it a prime minister of Holland? Is that what it was? Which one was the moon rock they gave that turned out to be petrified wood? So the Apollo astronauts gave a moon rock to some foreign dignitary, and it turned out to be a piece of petrified wood.
So Rogan brings up an interesting thing here in that the U.S., I don't know if it was the Apollo astronauts themselves, it could have been a diplomat, gave a moon rock away to another diplomat, which later turned out to be fake, which that is a real story. So that's just kind of a funny thing. But another thing he brings up is the Apollo missions did place things on the moon. Again, to say that we didn't actually put something on the moon I don't think you can say that. There's clearly something up there. Clearly something went there. It was tracked by foreign governments. People have taken pictures of it. India's taken pictures of the moon landing site. China has. Japan has. South Korea has. So there's something up there. And they did collect lunar samples. They did place experiments up there. There was a solar wind experiment and another one. But they did things while they were up there. And to fake all of that would have required some sort of like a robot or a probe or something, it might have just been easier to send people up there to do this in 1969. Maybe not today, but in 1969 it probably would have. And the fact that we can actually send biologics through the Van Allen radiation belt has been proven by the Soviets. And the fact that micrometeorites aren't that big of a deal, I think it might have been easier to just actually send people up to the moon. Another interesting point is these photographs taken by China, Japan, Russia of the Apollo 11 site. I believe India's shows the walk paths of the astronaut. It's not clear enough that you can see individual footprints, but you can see the activity down there on the moon's surface. So I think sometime within our lifetimes, we should be able to get some images of the Apollo sites that show footprints. And once we see that, I think that's going to be pretty definitive. I don't think NASA would have been able to have faked footprints and walking paths, because then you'd need some sort of animatronic robot up there, and then it just gets kind of far-fetched. But I think once we see the actual footprints in an image, which we haven't yet, but once we see those, I think that's going to be the final nail in the coffin here, and we can finally prove that the moon landing was real. But right now we don't have that.
One of the things was some of the photographs of the moon, they ran through one of those AI detectors that can tell you whether or not something's false or artificially generated. And it showed different images from, I think it was a Chinese satellite of the moon. They said this is legitimate. But then it got to these Apollo images, and they said these have been doctored. This AI
Who said that?
This AI program that
All
they
the
ran,
images or a few of them?
a few of them.
But then other ones were found to be authentic.
I don't think so. I think they only ran a few images through. See if you can find those, Jamie. Find what they did. Again, this is not saying that we didn't go to the moon. It could be, and this was a fact with the Gemini 15 program, where Michael Collins, there was a photograph of Michael Collins that they took in one of his training exercises, where he had those packs that they put on where they can move around while they're doing moonwalks, or not moonwalks, spacewalks outside of where they're connected by a tether. And he was like in this harness and manipulating this device. And what they had done is taken a photograph of him training, and then someone, probably some overzealous PR person, had taken that photograph and then blacked out the background and tried to pass it off as a really clear photograph of him out there on a spacewalk, which is probably very difficult to get, right? You'd have to have another person at the camera, frame it right. They had this photo. They're like, look, he did it. Let's just pass this off as the real thing, which is, you're also talking about the Nixon administration, where they were just full of shit constantly.
If you remember, this is where he tried to
Yes.
claim it was from, which is a Russian video. I don't know.
So there's different video where they ran it through, and they said it was real, and was it a Chinese program? But when they ran the American ones, the American images, they said that they were doctored. Again, it doesn't mean that we didn't go to the moon, but it does mean, okay, there's that. That's weird.
So Rogan brings up just kind of offhandedly about this. Russian President Vladimir Putin came out during this AI summit and said that Russia had ran some images of NASA's moon landing through a AI deepfake detector, and they came back fake. Just a couple things to point out on this. The AI deepfake detectors are designed to detect images generated by AI, not images doctored in the way that you would in the late 60s or early 70s, where you're actually working with film cameras. So these AI detectors aren't set up for that. Also, the Russians never came out and said which images specifically they proved to be doctored. They just said some of them. So it was a very vague statement made by Russia. They said they used a Google deepfake detector. Google came out and said that they didn't support what they said. So not a super strong claim, but I believe Joe, he's just kind of saying something that he saw in this documentary. It's not something that he's independently looked up. So I certainly don't fault Joe for saying that at all. Because it does sound, if you say, oh, the Russians, they proved these photos were fake, it is a strong assertion.
Have you ever seen the Apollo 11 post-flight press conference?
Yeah.
It looks like a hostage video. It looks like a bunch of guys who don't want to be there. They look real fucking nervous, and they look real deceptive. And if you watch that video, it's weird.
Well, but I think that's the temperament it requires to do something like that.
Could be.
It's almost suicidal to go to the
Right.
moon. And so you have to be like barely even a human psychologically to do it. So that to me is just like, and they just went through this whole experience. Well, who knows what that does to the human psyche? To even just like be in the vastness of space, even on the space station, I feel like that would change me as a person, not necessarily for the best.
So here they're talking about the Apollo 11 post-mission press conference. This happened 21 days or so after the astronauts got back, and they'd been in quarantine. The astronauts had been in quarantine for 21 days. I guess maybe we were worried about some sort of alien parasitic space slug being attached to them, so we put them in quarantine. They would have had probably minimal human contact, and the contact they would have had would have been either people in like hazmat suits or behind a mirror. So it would have been a very interesting experience for 3 weeks, 21 days that these astronauts would have been, isolated and by themselves after coming back from the moon, and that whole arguably you could say traumatic experience. It would have, as Walsh said, it would be very traumatic to the psyche to go through something like that. And the guys themselves, they're not actors. They're not PR people. They were selected for the mission because of their temperament. I mean, you're talking about people that, like Walsh said, are going on a suicide mission and also would have to be stoic under the face of extreme pressure. If something went wrong up there, you cannot have people that are going to start panicking. You cannot have people that are going to have all the normal emotions that a person would have if something terrible was going to happen and they knew they were going to die. You need people that have a very unusual temperament. So I think all those things combined, it does lead to this really weird post-mission press conference. I'll link below to an analysis, a visual behavioral analysis of the Apollo press conference that I saw, where the overall assertion of the guy is that the Apollo astronauts are nervous, but they're not necessarily ashamed, and they're not necessarily being deceptive. They're just nervous and stressed out, which seems reasonable. Going to the moon and coming back and then being alone for 3 weeks.
So then what would you say, or someone who is a full-on believer,
Not a full-on believer,
someone who is a full-on believer in the moon hoax, what would they say to my other point that there is evidence we went to the moon? You can try to nitpick the evidence. Mm-hmm. There is zero evidence of a hoax, because that's a whole other event that would have had to have happened. There is no evidence at all, not one sliver of evidence ever, of that hoax having ever happened.
But I think that's a weird way to frame it, right? Is there evidence of a hoax of the JFK assassination that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone? Do you think there's evidence?
Well, but the event itself, being that JFK was killed, happened.
But that's not the conspiracy. So the conspiracy is, did he act alone? And is there evidence that he didn't act alone? What do you think?
I'm very skeptical that he acted alone. Yeah.
Right. But
I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened. Nobody does.
Exactly.
So here's a really good point as well. Is what Rogan's trying to say too here is, because the government has been deceptive about things, because the government has been deceptive about JFK, I think we could probably say that almost to 100% certainty. Not fully, but almost. Because the government was deceptive about Bobby Kennedy, deceptive about the Nixon impeachment. We could look at things like 9/11 and some weird questions around there. And because of all these things, people tend to, you look back at something like the moon landing, you look back at the fact that they say, oh, we don't have the Saturn V rocket technology anymore. Oh, we taped over the original moon landing footage, right? That's just dumb. But because the government is like this, we do have questions about the moon landing. And I will just say that before I made this video, if you had asked me if I was a believer, if I thought that we really went to the moon, I would have told you probably not. I would have maybe put the chance that we actually went to the moon at maybe 10%. But after researching this, after looking up the Van Allen belts, they said they went through the Van Allen belts, after looking up the Zond 5 Soviet probe that actually did send biologics out into deep space, and the fact that in the late 60s we were sending stuff out to the moon. We crashed a spacecraft into the moon to see if the moon was made of cheese or if it was hollow. So we could get things out to the moon. The struggle was getting humans out there and getting them back safely. And if you look at everything they did, collecting the lunar samples, riding around on their lunar rovers, walking around, collecting moon rocks, and the fact that the lunar sites are there, the fact that governments did track the Apollo missions, they tracked the radio communications, I would say 1969, it probably would have been easier, and I can't believe I'm saying this, probably would have been easier to just send humans up there to do this rather than try to pull off some elaborate hoax. I would probably put the chance that we went to the moon at 90, even 95%. And I honestly cannot believe I'm saying that. I was not a believer of this until just a few days ago when I started researching this. And it blows me away to come to this conclusion, but it's crazy. It's crazy. So we made it to the moon, USA #1. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.